You know, I'm an outsider. I'm sitting here listening to a conversation that sounds to me like a battle over who controls the Kashmiri ballroom on the Titanic. I mean, the bottom line is that the glaciers in Tibet that feed the waters of India and Pakistan are failing. The Maldives are going under. The Bangladesh is going under. Pakistan has been devastated over and over again by floods. I mean, in the 21st century, national security is not an issue of the sort that we dealt with a generation ago. We are dealing with a completely different issue. And of course, Pakistan, thinks that India doesn't want to talk about the issue. But the real issue, I think, is that India needs to go beyond that. India needs to set priorities. What is threatening? Not India, but the people of South Asia. That is the topic that matters and which will bring people together.
I take your point, but my only rebut to you on that one, Dr. Lebo, is that Hawaii is one of the states of the United States of America, and Hawaii is also going underwater because of global warming. Tomorrow, yes. If another country was to claim territorial sovereignty over Hawaii, America wouldn't give it up, saying that because of climate change it's going to go away anyway. And let's look at larger issues. There are issues of national security that are involved here, and issues of India's strategic interest. I'm going to come back to you in just a bit, Dr. Lebo. I want to go back to Shuja Nawaz, and first, before that, to Michael Kogelman. You see, Michael, the fact is that there is a very deliberate thought process going on here that Pakistan wants at least whoever in the international community is listening to believe that India is responsible for calling off the talks. In your view, since you follow South Asia very closely, in your view, will that be a script which will be seen to be believable by the international community and especially the United States of America?
I think it's a script that's not really going to be paid much attention to in the near future. But I think, we've been talking throughout here about Washington really not paying much attention to this spat between Pakistan and India over Kashmir. I think that in this town, we're going to be talking about these issues a lot more in the coming months, especially next year, after most troops have left Afghanistan, and you have situations of Pakistani militant groups such as Lashkar-e-Taiba that have been fighting in Afghanistan. They've been fighting troops there. Once these troops leave, I think that these extremist organizations that are anti-India to the core will be returning or redirecting their attention to Kashmir and to India. And I fear that the line of control could become a really, really big flashpoint, even more than it is now, in the coming months and years. And I think at that point, Washington will come out of its stupor, so to speak, and wake up to the fact that Kashmir really is a big deal in the context of stability and the context of international security. I think that's going to be something to talk about in the coming months. But I think you need confidence-building measures. India and Pakistan, there's no way they're going to see clearly or see the same on the Kashmir issue unless things happen first. And I think it's important to acknowledge that in recent years there was fairly significant levels of diplomacy between the two countries. The civilian governments meeting together, cricket diplomacy, all of that. And let's not forget that Pakistan not too long ago finally agreed to give most favored nation status to India. So there was movement toward trade normalization, which would be a huge confidence-building measure. And I think that Pakistan would not have agreed to do that unless the security establishment in Pakistan agreed to it. So I think that there is potential. It's just that now, given the domestic political climate in Pakistan, with Nawaz Sharif really cut down to size with this recent political crisis, it's going to be very difficult for forces within Pakistan that are willing to be a bit more optimistic and open-minded on dealing with India writ large, and by definition on the Kashmir issue. It's going to be more difficult to move ahead in the coming months.
Well, I mean, Michael, I hear what you're saying here, but I'm a bit surprised actually, Michael, with your perspective, because I would have thought that with the global fight against terrorism becoming center stage, this would be the moment to actually talk about the issues of terrorism in the Indian subcontinent. This would be the time to talk about what happens with the Haqqani network. This would be the time to talk about the Lashkar-e-Taiba, to talk about the way in which these groups are getting funding and protection and patronage, about how the American dollars which are being pumped into the region are actually funding the entire terror organization which is there in North Waziristan. Michael, can I just take you up on that? Are you saying that today America has become so utterly myopic or perhaps desperately worried about what's happening with the ISIS, that they have absolutely no concern for the Al-Qaeda, which is getting the ISI's patronage, about the Lashkar-e-Toiba, against whom there are Security Council resolutions. I'm sure, Michael, you're not suggesting that all these issues are not issues of concern for the White House, especially at a time when this was the theme of Obama's speech before the United Nations General Assembly.
No, of course, absolutely. International terrorism remains a core objective, or getting rid of it is a core objective for the U.S. government, for sure. But I think that, you have to look at these things relatively. ISIS is perceived as, and also these new revelations, these new groups like Khorasan, groups like that in the Middle East are perceived as more of a threat to the United States. And that's really the big issue here, is that these are groups that are seen as more of an immediate threat to the United States. So naturally the U.S. government would be more focused on them. I certainly would argue, though, that the U.S. Washington, Washington, is looking very closely.
Because Michael, if there is one concern that we have. Generally, we have seen this experience historically with the United States, that as you turn around, Shuja Nawaz, the concern is that as you turn around, America is very good at crisis management, and as and many observers have said, it is terrible at crisis resolution. And the general history has been that as you exit from different regions, you turn away from the problems of the region.
There's much more than that. Let me go along with what Dr. Kugelman said. I mean, we have to be realistic. All cultures have a political culture. America historically knows the Middle East exists. They've heard of the people within, 100 yards of Jerusalem. If a Jew or an Arab is attacked, that means something. Unfortunately, if a Jain is, they don't know what that means. The bottom line is that the American population moves to an extent the American leadership, and the American leadership is feeding off of a population that has no idea of South Asia.
Are you saying America does not know that the Al-Qaeda exists?
Well, it knows
Al-Qaeda, which a few hundred meters from here brought down your World Trade Center.
Exactly.
My question to you is, a decade later,
that was an Al-Qaeda that was connected to Saudi Arabia, to Egypt. Our sense of the world is still much more linked to the Middle East. Until very recently,
that would be a
Americans did not have
terribly
a sense of
short-sighted perspective.
But it is also the reality. Cultures, nations have a national history and culture. Americans are much more aware of things that flow out of the Middle East than South Asia. Until recently, we didn't even have a South Asian population. And that is part of the American political culture.
I'm a bit surprised with that perspective. I would be worried with that perspective, Dr.
But it's true. We have to recognize it.
By that yardstick, would you blame it on America's ignorance about South Asia, and that's why they went into the wrong country, Afghanistan, and not Pakistan? There is a book now doing the rounds, which is called The Wrong Enemy.
That is one of the reasons why.
I mean, are we simplifying things to that extent?
But there is no fact. The fact of the matter is that American political culture is very simple. Well, it was one of the reasons why the American president was able to sell a war that was started by people from Egypt and Saudi Arabia, organized by Afghanistan, and ended up invading Iraq, because somehow Saddam Hussein and bin Laden were conflated. South Asia is largely outside of the perspective of America.
I take you up further. I grant you that American understanding about the Arab world is much better than it's about other regions like South Asia.
I wouldn't say they're understanding, but they're aware of it.
Okay, awareness. Awareness. So is it because of that America suddenly announced victory and pulled out of Iraq and let all the secessionist forces build up, including those Arabs who are now your allies, who are now were the people responsible for the creation of the ISIS?
In fact,
I mean, how do you justify all these acts?
Can I just break up this wonderful conversation for a minute? I'm very sorry about this, because we're not talking about how myopic or how hypermetropic American foreign policy is. That can be a subject of another discussion.
This is a South Asian conversation about Kashmir in a global forum. Yes. So what else is new?
Yes, certainly it is. But our concern really is, and by the way, I'd like to place on record here, that India is eminently capable of handling Pakistan. And I think we have handled Pakistan without any help from the Americans for a fairly long time. All that we are saying here is that America should be fairly realistic. And the clout that America has in the international community should be used to the right, in the right way, in the right direction, with the right perspective, and towards the right players. And if that does not happen, then America's role internationally can be more destructive than productive.
To be dominated by what Americans are concerned about and what our media covers.
Well, now I'd like to go back to the subject which we are really looking at right now, and Rashid, Qureshi, and Maruf, we have a few minutes more on this part of the chat. Rashid Qureshi, you know, the message that we have from New York is for the last 24 to 36 hours, your delegation is getting extremely concerned about how it is going to drive an attention, sort of a build-up, create a big build-up over Kashmir, what kind of references will be made to Kashmir. My question to you, General Rashid Qureshi, is last year when Nawaz Sharif came before the UNGA, he sort of mentioned Kashmir, but he mentioned in a very, I have to mention kind of way. He mentioned the three sort of templated lines on Kashmir. Do you think he'll try to go further when he speaks now, or will he stay where he was?
Arnab, I'm not part of the government and I'm not part of our foreign policy or whatever they may have decided. I'm not a speechwriter, so frankly, I wouldn't know how to answer your question. But I think, personally, as a common citizen of Pakistan, and that's what I am today, I think if India and Pakistan continue to ignore, and when I say ignore, I mean India ignores the Kashmir issue, behaves like an ostrich, puts its head down in the sand and says Kashmir problem does not exist,
Sir, you know,
we will not move further. I think Pakistan and India need to squarely face this issue. We need to discuss it between the two countries. If you want to do it bilaterally, if you want the United Nations to come in, there's already a resolution on that.
I want to remind you, General Qureshi, and because I have a little time, I want to go to Mahesh Jetmalani on
Kashmir. If we do not, there will be very little chances of peace in our region. And if there is no peace in our region, then progress of
Kashmir
Pakistan
that you
and the
play
people of
again
India
and again
will
and
be
again.
hampered.
If there is one thing,
I think no. Now, listen. The problem with you is that you don't want to listen to a dissenting view.
This is
take
we are
on
not
the
living in the
Americans
1950s.
until they agree to your
So
way
we're not
of
living in the
thinking.
1950s.
You don't let off. If you don't make me agree to how you're thinking, you don't want to listen to it. That's not how issues are resolved. And I think you need to take that into account.
Sir, I take it into account, but I think you should, I think, sir, that you should also take into account today that India is a country, it's one of the largest economies of the world, it's one of the largest armies in the world, it has the greatest significance, it's one of the biggest business players with America. And therefore India will do everything it can. And the sense I get from New York, sir, is that you should be prepared for India doing everything it can to take you head on in the international community and twist its position to its own advantage. Because this is not the 1950s. The Cold War is over. You're not going to get the American funding for far too long. And you should now prepare for the future where global realities have changed. In fact, as Narendra Modi wrote in the Wall Street Journal, this is a moment of global flux. And we are big players. We know our position, and we are certainly going to flex our bit of muscle now. Mahesh Jetmalani, please. I saw you raise your hand there when Rashid Qureshi was speaking. Yes, Mahesh.
Well, but Arnab, it's heartening to note that for all his waxing eloquent in the UN, which we expect, or saber rattling as the case may be, America's present policy at least is one of benign neglect. So really speaking, so far as South Asia is concerned, frankly speaking, it's only going to be a cry in the wilderness, and we shouldn't be unduly worried, perturbed, or losing much sleep about this. But just a thought for General Qureshi: if he feels that talk should, and if he has any influence on the powers that be in Pakistan, I know he calls himself a common citizen, but he's far more than that. If he feels that talk should be resumed, perhaps he should now look at the Indian perspective and, for a change, worry about Indian sensitivities. The last one being, which we were offended by, was the talk by Abdul Basit with the Hurriyat. Perhaps if Abdul Basit was recalled as ambassador, as acknowledgement that what he did was an egregious faux pas, then perhaps talks may resume. Maybe he should ponder on that and spread that message in Pakistan in the circles that he moves in.
I'm wrapping up right now, totally short of time, but you know, the mood has changed. The mood has changed in New York, and the mood has also changed in India, because this is not the same India where Manmohan Singh, 2 months after the July train bombings in 2006, went and said that Pakistan, like India, is a victim of terrorism. That kind of compassionate, extra compassionate point of view towards Pakistan, which has given you the leverage to play this card again and again, is not going to happen again. I thank you all very much for joining me on this chat. Gentlemen, on the News Hour tonight, I'll be back very soon.